You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Hello everybody and welcome back on this lovely Wednesday evening. I hope you're excited and raring to go for another episode of Haunted Histories with me, your captain of the haunted historical ship, Penny G. Morgan. Last week we visited Newsham Park Orphanage with the lovely Phil Barron of Haunted Happenings. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the show yet, please do, as you'd hear him talk about the photo which made its way into the national press. Plus, don't forget to have a look at Haunted Happenings' Facebook page for all the events that they've got coming up all over the country. They're busy guys at that place. So, tonight, where are we? Well, we're just up the road from me at a place called Kelvedon Hatch, or as most people term it, and never forget to say this without your tongue placed firmly in your cheek, the secret nuclear bunker. The amusement being, if you've never seen it, is there are signs everywhere pointing to the secret nuclear bunker. I believe it even made it onto Top Gear with much hilarity from Mr. Clarkson and the boys. We're going to be joined by the lovely Gemma Snow of Fright-Nights Cambridge, who has visited there very recently, and she will let us know some of her and her guests' experience of this fascinating place. But on to history. Well, what are we going to be looking at? Anyone who grew up during the Cold War period will know that there is so much we could talk about in that time, from possibly the first nuclear bomb which dropped on Hiroshima on the 6th of August in 1945, being released by a B-29 bomber, the infamous Enola Gay, to the very near World War III in June 1980. Did you know that? Yeah. When the American NORAD computers, which stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command, which were based into the Cheyenne Mountains, malfunctioned and flagged up that Soviet missiles were heading to Washington, albeit phantom Soviet missiles. The way the computer systems worked, the B-52 bombers were already loaded and becoming airborne, with the Boeing KG-135 Stratotankers that were actually based here in the UK were seen warming up on the runways, ready to taxi off to those B-52s as they came over the UK to refuel them. Or we could even talk about how the Cold War ended, with the amazing, I think he was amazing, Mikhail Gorbachev, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. But I think what I would like to look at is some of the reasons why we had all these bunkers, and there's a lot of them when you start looking into it, built in the UK. Was it because we were directly under threat? Or was it because our ally was stirring the proverbial pot and we would have been in the firing line? Contentious? Possibly. Fact? Pretty definitely. So let's start. For nearly 50 years of the Cold War, the two nations of the United States and the Soviet Union were pretty much at loggerheads. Why was this? How did it start? Well, to examine this, we need to look back as to why these two incredible nations decided that they didn't want to eat at the same table as each other. Neither the Soviet Union or the US had ever really had to worry about being attacked or invaded, really. They were normally the ones doing the attacking, and this maybe had given them a false sense of security. We saw it comparatively recently with the awful 9/11 in the US, and whilst I am in no way, please rest assured, I am in no way making light of this act of terrorism, it is not something that America has had to deal with as much as the UK, and invasion is certainly something neither they or the Soviet Union had to ever worry about. This probably turned both nations into something warlike, as they felt that they were pretty much invincible. And we can probably look to two major incidents in the 40s, though, as to what gave rise to that antagonism, for want of a better word. Pearl Harbor and the Berlin crisis. Now, most people know about Pearl Harbor, and you're probably shouting at me, but that wasn't the Russians, Penny. Learn your history, my love. It was the Japanese. Yes, it was the Japanese. But the Americans managed to spin it to bolster their dislike of the Soviets going forwards. The Berlin crisis in 1948 was something completely different. It's also known as the Berlin blockade, and that lasted from late June 1948 to mid-May 1949. And it was probably one of the first major, shall we say, international crises of the Cold War. During the multinational occupation of post-World War II Germany, the Soviet Union blocked the Western Allies' railway, road and canal access to the sectors of Berlin that were actually under Western control. The Soviets offered to drop the blockade if the Western Allies withdrew the newly introduced Deutschmark from West Berlin. In response, the Western Allies organised the Berlin airlift from June 48 to September 49 to carry supplies to the people of West Berlin. Difficult feat given the size of the city's population, but air crews from the US Air Force, the RAF, the French Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, New Zealand and South African Air Forces flew something in the region of 200,000 flights in 1 year, providing those West Berliners up to just under 9,000 tonnes of necessities each day, such as fuel and food. The Soviets didn't actually disrupt the airlift because they were a bit concerned it could actually lead to pretty much open conflict. By the spring of 1949, the airlift was, quite obviously succeeding, and by the April it was delivering more cargo than had previously been transported into the city by the rail. On the 12th of May 1949, the USSR, the Soviet Union, lifted the blockade of West Berlin. But this blockade served to highlight the competing ideological and economic visions for post-war Europe. Those youngsters out there who maybe didn't realise that after World War II, Berlin was split into West and East, and eventually a large wall was put up between the two areas, although this wasn't actually built until 1961. The East was communist, controlled in effect by the Soviets, and the West was, Western. The wall didn't fall until around 1989. The Cold War ended a few years after. When you look at the two idealisms of the two nations, America being capitalist and determined to achieve economic expansion, and kind of self-casting themselves as their kind of self-styled saviour of European democracy. I won't give you my opinion on that today, but maybe another time. Don't want to cause too much contention. But then the Soviets being communist and intending to consolidate this communist outlook in all of the satellite states and new areas of communist control in Europe, East Berlin being one of them. You can see how much of a juxtaposition it would have been for the two nations to work next to each other. It did create an even further divide with reading up on it, it's almost like a, if you like us, you're not allowed to like them, schoolyard mentality. You know, the whole thing, well, if you're going to play with them, I don't want to play with you. It's them or us. And it's quite, most of us know the nations that sided with either side, whether you were communist or capitalist. What further exacerbated the tension between the two countries was the news that the Soviets had created the first atomic bomb in 1949, or their first atomic bomb, I should say. Although it did take them nearly a further 8 years before they developed any real kind of meaningful distribution of these nuclear weapons for them to reach just any part of the world, and that technology came with the launch of the Sputnik satellite into orbit. Probably showing my age, but I don't know if anyone remembers 66 Sputnik? Well, that's where the Sputnik bit came from. Now, this is all very well and good, Penny, I hear you say. No, I can hear you saying that. What are you waffling on about? This show's meant to be on Kelvedon Hatch. When are we going to talk about Kelvedon Hatch? Well, this is leading me to why these shelters, such as Kelvedon Hatch, were constructed. Surely this potential conflict was between the US and the Soviets. Why were we getting involved in the UK? Well, the answer is yes and no. It was between the two of them. But it's an interesting one. And there is a very informative book called Cold War Secret: Nuclear Bunkers, the Passive Defence of the Western World During the Cold War by somebody called Nick McCamley. Please don't let the title put you off. I know it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But this book is a really in-depth look at this whole period and explains a lot of things in a way that you would never have probably even considered if you grew up during that era. Nick explains that as a consequence of America's sort of ex-economic Big Brother-esque arm over her allies after the war, that in exchange for financial assistance, they were compelled to accept the status of America's front line against the Soviet hordes. This wasn't exactly pushed as an ultimatum, more as an agreement to a mutual defence of common good. Kind of an ultimatum disguised as something else. The West was being drawn into the US nuclear web at this point and helping perpetuate any, I suppose, American propaganda to do with the Soviets. Anyone watching programmes that would smack of conspiracy from the 1960s and the 1970s especially will probably remember that all these Americans seem to all have nuclear fallout shelters built into their back gardens. We didn't seem to do that in Britain. We seemed to be a little more laissez-faire about it. But I do remember growing up in the 70s and 80s myself, in the heady days of CND and the like, Greenham Common, all those kind of things, and having to watch infomercial type programmes on what to do in the event of a nuclear attack. Not fun things for a kid to watch, but we were expected to watch them and know what to do, and the fear of the button being pushed hung over us pretty much our whole schooling. But why the British? Why are we America's lapdog when it comes to this? Well, we were part of America's forward defence, her early warning systems. Anyone heard of Fylingdales up in Yorkshire? No? Not heard of it? Look it up. Google it. Shrouded in conspiratorial mystery, that place. We also had America's forward fighter and bomber bases. Anyone growing up in the East Anglia area remembers those. Lakenheath, Mildenhall and the like. I remember growing up in East Anglia and seeing missiles being transported in big lorries up the road and fighter jets coming over. F-111s I think they were predominantly. But this heavy concentration of US military in the UK is the very reason for our proliferation of bunkers. You may not actually realise how many there are until you start looking, and those are the ones that are decommissioned or that the Ministry of Defence have actually released details of. It does make me wonder how many we don't yet know about, and there are a few which supposedly are still in, well, not so much operation, but are still very much used, RAF Stakstonwold being one of them. We haven't looked in the programmes I've done up to this date at the history of radar in my series. This was a vitally important part of forward defences. Radar was developed very, very heavily during World War II, and some might say it was one of the things that helped us win, well, the Battle of Britain, if nothing else. Radar actually stands for radio detection, or sometimes direction and ranging. And it really was vital in the part it played, and the British government realised what a vital role it would continue to play in the defence of the UK. But they also realised that the system which was being used during World War II would possibly not be technical enough to keep up to date with the new, more sophisticated Soviet bombers. These bombers were now flying at much higher altitudes and were supersonic. Whilst the radar system we had could detect aircraft at a medium altitude, so you're looking probably at about 15,000 feet, it was not 100% or anywhere near that on an accuracy basis. So what they began using was something called the chain home system. Now, this was actually an original system, and it also sometimes would just put a CH for short. And it was the code name for a ring of coastal early warning radar stations built by the RAF before, actually, and during the Second World War to detect and track aircraft. This was used as an early warning system, but was accompanied by the construction of, for this, when they realised they still needed radar come to the 50s, of mostly underground control centres, which had top-of-the-range telephony and telex systems, all in touch with each other. This was actually known as rotor, and this is where, I'm coming to it, I promise, Kelvedon Hatch comes in. The shelter was constructed in 1952 into 1953 and was designated an R4, Sector Operations Control, or R4 SOC, as they're sometimes known. Interestingly enough, Marconi's were the prime contractor, or was the prime contractor, for radar equipment for these shelters. Marconi, who I mentioned in my show with Kerry G the other week that I guested on, when we were talking about the Isle of Wight and about the fact Marconi lived there for a while. This was also the same Marconi whose factories were based in Chelmsford for many, many years until they started to get closed down and sold off. Chelmsford itself is only about 15 miles away from Kelvedon Hatch. And Marconi actually supplied these systems to pretty much all of these centres. Now, there were 6 SOCs, or Sector Operations Centres. I won't go into all the nitty-gritty on all of them and where they were, but if you are interested in learning more, that book I mentioned by Nick McCamley is actually very, very informative. And if anyone wants to know what it was called and they can't remember, there's a good reason for listening to the show again. Or drop us a message on the Parasearch page and we'll come back to you and let you know the title. Well, the design of these bunkers was pretty uniform, which is an interesting thing. Most had a typical, what they call rotor guardhouse, which were kind of like innocuous bungalow-like structures, very unassuming. Just like the one at Kelvedon Hatch, in fact. Some of these bunkers would have hidden just one floor below, mainly for the more reporting centres under the R1 or R2 codes. The multi-floor R3 or R4 sector operations centres, the SOCs, had at least 2 or 3 floors. There would also, with these larger centres, be a couple of large brick buildings dotted around. One of them would have a big steel cowl on top, and this was actually the emergency exit and ventilation shaft. The excavation for these centres would have been absolutely massive. At the very least, they would have had to be 60 foot deep, at minimum, and around 200 foot wide. Because Kelvedon Hatch is one of the bigger centres, one of the SOCs, it's actually around 125 feet underground, and the entrance is through this ordinary looking bungalow, or guardhouse, set amongst the trees. The inside of the bungalow leads to a 100-yard or a 91-metre tunnel entering the R4 at its lowest floor of the 3. Above are 2 more floors and the hill which covers it. A lot of these deeper shelters that did have 2 or 3 floors, they didn't go deep enough to have the floors, so they would go as deep as they could and then build up over it. And there would be a large radio mast. Now, I was chatting to someone the other day who actually lived in Kelvedon Hatch, and I asked her if people actually knew what was going on there, and she said it was quite hard to hide. There was something going on there, but nobody really knew what, because the radio mast was pretty darn big. But locals, unless they were working on it, and if they were, they would have probably been, had to sign a secrecy agreement. People knew something was going on, they just didn't know what. But these bunkers, especially ones like Kelvedon Hatch, were actually able to accommodate some hundreds of personnel. The numbers actually changed as the function and the form varied over the years. And they could actually sustain them for up to 3 months. I'm not sure why 3 months was important. There's probably something to do with fallout and all of that kind of thing, but 3 months was the figure. The bunker would have had air conditioning and heating. They used the original rotor plants, plants as in mechanical machinery plants that were in there, but then they changed the actual coolant that was going through them in the 1980s. It had its own water supply, mains water with its own deep borehole, and generators, and was equipped with many types of radio equipment, as I said, telephony systems, telex, all protected from EMP, electromagnetic pulse, which was a problem with nuclear warfare. It emitted an EMP, and they would have various other military systems that they needed in these places. So how long was this rotor system in operation? Not very long. All that expense to build these places, of which there was about, I think there was about 66 or 60 plus, it ran into the tens of millions, even back in the early 1950s. And rotor was operational for 12 months. A new type of radar was found, and this was deemed to be more efficient, and was probably more efficient, so they needed less centres for it to be based from. And it reduced the need of these 60 plus bases, which operated as part of rotor. Now, it must have been obvious to everyone involved in the project that the massive cost of building the site couldn't be wasted, so it was converted. First into a civilian defence centre, then later, as part of continuity of government plans, into a Home Office regional seat of government. From 1967, this was a sub-regional headquarters, and finally from 1985, it became the regional government headquarters for London, RGHQ. In the event of nuclear war, the role of RGHQs was to house the key government and military staff needed to run the country after the bombs had finished falling. Up to 600 personnel would be shut in and left completely isolated for up to 3 months, or until it was deemed safe to emerge. Everything they needed for food, water, power and air conditioning was provided in the complex, whilst multiple communication networks linked them to the other centres and hopefully any remaining population outside. It would be grim, but you'd be alive. In 1992, only 1992, Kelvedon Hatch was finally closed. Running costs were still in the millions a year, about 3 to 4 million is believed, and the site had never been used for, other than practice operations. At a closed auction, the Parish family, who had actually originally sold the land for the base and still farmed the surrounding fields, brought it back. The family later opened it as the fascinating, albeit slightly unnerving, tourist attraction you can go and visit today. As I said earlier, the Cold War reigned for nearly 50 years, so that is a very whistle-stop tour to give you an idea as to some of the events that gave rise to why some of these bunkers were built in the UK. Even though school children today are not really educated on what to do in the event of a nuclear event, bomb, whatever you want to call it, it's still something which many media outlets and websites still look at today. With terrorists becoming ever more sophisticated, there is the possibility of some kind of nuclear device, even if it isn't coming from America's old nemesis, the Soviet Union. Or would that be the Soviet Union's old nemesis, America? Who knows? A quick Google of what to do in the event of a nuclear war shows you articles as recent as March and April of this year from what I would call pretty national newspapers, giving guidelines as to the food that you'd need and where to go. Scary. The bunker itself is rumoured, and I say it's rumoured, to still be functional if required. Not something I really want to find out, if I'm completely honest. I can't imagine the feeling of hearing this noise and not knowing what I was going to see if and when I came out, as those 1.5-ton blast doors were shut on me. Quite scary, if you ask me. Anyway, on that note, it's time for a quick break. And someone I always love to hear from is going to have a talk to us. And then on to part 2, and a very interesting chat with the lovely Gemma Snow of Fright-Nights Cambridge. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
And welcome back. Part 2 of this Haunted Histories episode on Kelvedon Hatch, the not-so-secret nuclear bunker just outside of Brentwood in Essex. I'm joined now by my special guest, Gemma Snow, from Fright-Nights Cambridge, who has recently done an investigation at Kelvedon Hatch and is going to let us know all about their experiences there and also some of the stories that she may have heard about the place. But before we get on to that, hi Gemma.
Hi Penny.
Hiya. Something I like to be a bit nosy and find out about my guests before we start talking about venues and all that stuff. How did you get into the paranormal and get into investigating?
Well, it's something I've always been interested in, but I think it really all started when I moved into a new house when my second daughter was born and she was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And we had lots of strange things going on that I couldn't explain, and it didn't happen just to me, it happened to other people as well who came into the house.
What sort of things would happen?
Well, to start with, it was just little things like noises and shadows going across the mirror, and the kettle would turn on its own and the shower would come on. And then one night, I was going out and my mum came round to babysit. And this was one of the first times that I'd left my daughter, and I said, I'll keep checking on her because she keeps pulling her little blanket up over her head. So we went out and my mum went and checked on her and she'd pulled her blanket up over her head. So she took the blanket off and put it back down, went back up and checked on her a bit later. The same thing had happened. And then the third time she went up and she threw the little blanket over the end of the cot so that she couldn't reach it at all. Back downstairs, she said that all of a sudden she was watching the television and this there was like an interference on the television, like it went all fuzzy, and she went back up to check on Lucy again, and the blanket was back over her. But it wasn't just over her, it was folded over at the top and tucked in all around the sides.
Weird. How old was Lucy at this point?
She was only a few months old. She was probably...
So she couldn't have crawled to the other end of the cot and pulled the blanket off herself or anything like that?
No,
Wow.
definitely not. So that was one of the first big things that happened. And we had, footsteps down the stairs, and sometimes we had noises in the night so loud that we thought we were being burgled.
Wow.
So that's really where it all started, and I wanted to find out more about what was going on in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I booked my first ghost hunt. So that would have been 11 years ago, and that was quite an experience in itself.
Yeah. Where was it, your first ghost hunt?
It was with a company called Paranormal Tours, and
Right.
I went to Commonleys Farm, it's on the border of Oxfordshire.
Mm.
I don't think it's a well-known place. I don't think they do ghost hunts there now. It was just a privately owned residence, but
Right.
but the story went that there was supposed to have been an exorcism that had taken place in one of the bedrooms of this farmhouse.
All right.
And they were still having, years and years ago, but they were still having spooky activity going on in the house.
Oh.
And yes, I really, really enjoyed it, and it was a bit of an eye-opener, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of personal experiences there, and so I just continued booking ghost hunts and got addicted, really.
As you do. As you do, as I think most of us have. So,
Yeah.
You've obviously been doing, well, I say you've been doing it now for sort of 11 years, so you must have visited some interesting places. What's been possibly sort of a couple of your favourites, and has there ever been anywhere that's unnerved you, that's given you kind of the heebie-jeebies, so to speak?
Probably one of my favourite places I've been, just doing my own investigation, was Chillingham Castle in Northumberland. That's an absolutely amazing place. I really do love castles.
Yeah. And let's be honest, Northumberland's got quite a few of them.
Yes. But, you can stay at Chillingham Castle.
All right.
And I've stayed there a few times now. And it's a very, very spooky place. And I remember the first time I went there, I took a photograph out in the woods. There's a walk called Monk's Walk.
Right.
And in the photograph, I've got it's a mist, but it's in the shape of a horse. It looks like a ghost horse. It's probably one of the best photographs I've ever taken myself. But that definitely gave me the creeps. I was staying in one of the tower rooms, and one night we heard all this commotion above us, like furniture was being spun around. And we didn't we thought there was another room above us, but we didn't realise until the next day, and we spoke to some of the staff there, that there's no room. There was no room above us. It was just a flat roof.
Wow.
So I have no idea where the sound was coming from, but it was definitely a creepy experience.
Yeah, sounds it. But you enjoyed it. It's one of your favourite places that you've been to.
Yeah, definitely.
So is there anywhere that you've sort of almost had to steel yourself to go back into after an experience? Or has everything been quite sort of like, oh well, that doesn't feel too intimidating, let's go back?
I think I would always go back. I quite enjoy being scared. Probably my favourite venue that I go to with fright-nights is Hinchinbrook House.
Right.
I've had quite a few experiences there.
And where's that?
Been quite scary. That's in Huntingdon.
Right.
And that's it dates back to the 12th century.
Oh, wow.
So there was a church there, and then a nunnery, and then it was a family home for years, and the Cromwells lived there, and the Montagues.
Ah, right, okay, yeah, we talked about. I mentioned Cromwell when I did the Tower of London show right at the very beginning when I started doing this, because Cromwell was he was a Cambridgeshire boy, wasn't he? He was from Huntingdon originally, or something.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Mm.
Yes, I also go to Oliver Cromwell House in Ely.
Right.
He lived there as well for a short period of time. So anyway, the Hinchinbrook House is now a school.
Right.
And it's just an amazing building. And I had an experience there with ghost hunting with Fright-Nights Cambridgeshire, and we had we were in the reception room on one of the first vigils, and there's a large table, heavy table. It's probably about 8 foot long, and with the group, there was probably maybe 8 or 10 of us. We just walked into this room, and we're just chatting, and the vigil hadn't really begun, and all of a sudden there was an almighty noise, and the table seemed to lift off the floor and come down again, and then so that was a bit strange. And then when we had our last group vigil all together at the end of the night, there was a group of people doing glass divination on the table, and there was a man with his weight on the table, because it's such a big table he had to lean on it to reach the glass, and there were people sitting around on the floor and on the chairs, and this table lifted up off the floor again, and all 30 people witnessed it. And the people that were sitting on the floor and on the tables, on the chairs rather, they all said it felt as if the floor had been pushed up. It was just it was something that I can't explain.
So
I've never
does
experienced.
Hinchingbrooke have any sort of dark history to it, or is it's just got a lot of history, if that makes sense?
It's just got a lot of history. I don't think there's any really dark history, but there are bodies there buried in the grounds, and there was a fire at Hinchingbrooke, and part of the house burnt down, and these stone coffins were uncovered, and they're actually now on show underneath the staircase.
Right.
2 coffins, and they've not been moved. They're covered with glass. So
right.
Yeah, so there are bodies on the site. But
Have you got any tours, any investigations coming up there with Fright-Nights Cambridge anytime soon?
Yes, we are going there in November. The 4th of November, we're going back there. We usually do two investigations every year.
Okay.
So that's a really, really interesting place.
Sounds it. And you heard it here. Anyone listening, if you want to go and investigate there and see if a big heavy table can move for you, 4th of November. Is there anywhere that's on your, I suppose, wish list? Any sort of places that if money was no object, if time was no object, you could just, and if they did actually do investigations there, because some of the places I want to go to, I know full well they don't do investigations, unless you seem to be from Ghost Adventures Almost Haunted.
Yes.
Are there anywhere that you'd like to go? Anywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world. I think again with the castle theme, it would have to. I think Poland has got some amazing castles, and Transylvania. yeah,
Romania. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Haunted Happenings have got one going in Romania later this year. They're sort of they're looking into it as a group. It would be very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I did see a thing going on Facebook recently. I think it was that one of the castles, one of the sort of, I suppose, Vlad the Impaler castles, and somebody said, would you live here for a year for £1 million? And it was funny, all the replies from people I know who are into the paranormal are sort of like, hell yes, of course. Yes. And then friends I've got who are not into it are like, no. It was funny though, all the ones who are into the paranormal and stuff were like, yeah, wouldn't even need £1 million, just give me my food, sort of thing. Yeah, you can tell what we're all like compared to people who are not into paranormal investigating. Anywhere else?
There's some amazing places in in America. Some of the old asylums and
yes.
I think I would whenever I go anywhere for a weekend away, I always look for somewhere that's haunted.
Yes, I do that, or I spot buildings. It's almost like, oh, I wonder who owns that building. I wonder if I could get in there. Yeah, I've found one recently in Essex. It's one of the old workhouses, and it looks like it's abandoned and it's set back from the road. And I'm trying very hard to find out who owns the building, because it looks derelict, but not like falling down derelict.
Yeah.
And my thing is it's military stuff and workhouses, that kind of era. I'm fascinated by, but I have my 7-year-old is very into it, and whenever we go away, his first question is, "Mummy, do you think that building's haunted? Mummy, do you think that building's haunted? Mummy, do you think?" And I've had to stress to him, just because it's an old building or a new building, there's no reason why a new building wouldn't be haunted, because it's not necessarily the building itself. It could be either what's been brought into that building or what was on the site, as you've said with your house, your new house that you had weird things happening in. You just never know. You never know what was there. Yeah. So
that's right. Yeah.
So we've looked at your wish list. We've looked at some of the places you've been to. Let's talk about Kelvedon Hatch. Now, I've never investigated Kelvedon. Not yet.
Right.
So it's on my to-do list at some point. It just happens to be that whenever there's an overnighter, I can't, whether it's because of the children or work or whatever, I just can't do it. But I have been there as a visitor, so I do know the place. What were your first impressions when you went there?
I did do a recce a couple of weeks before I did my investigation, and I thought that even in the daytime, it's quite a scary place to be.
Definitely got a vibe to it, hasn't it?
It's got a vibe. I did feel uncomfortable there. I don't usually feel uncomfortable, and one of my co-workers on the night didn't feel comfortable going down to the bottom level on her own at all. She really didn't like it, and she's never felt like that before anywhere.
Right.
So but it's a really interesting place, and we had a really good investigation. It was really good fun, actually. Not many people stayed the night. I think there were 6 of us stayed for the whole night, and everybody else had to leave. They couldn't face staying there. But it is a fantastic place, and we did get some good activity there, actually.
Well, tell us about some of the activity without giving away too many of your secrets. I think you've got another visit coming up there later in the year, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got another couple. The next one is in September.
Right.
So looking forward to going back there.
Never know, Gemma,
so
maybe I'll have to join you for the September one. Because one of the challenges I've issued to all the investigators that I speak to is I've never been scared. Of all the things I've done, none of them have ever scared. None of the experiences I've had, I've never been scared. I've never been sort of to the point where I'm thinking, I want to get out of here. I've been to the points where I'm thinking, this could go either way. I have been at the points where I'm thinking, I wouldn't choose to spend any more time than I have to here. But I have never been frightened. And I want to be. And it's not that I'm a cynic or a skeptic or any of those things, because I'm not. I have never been unnerved in a place, and somebody has said to me they reckon a night at Kelvedon would unnerve me. Don't know.
I think you might be right. I definitely agree with that. You have to give it a go, won't you?
It'll be famous last words probably. I'll probably run out screaming at 10 o'clock at night, but there you go.
Wow. Okay. So, some of the things that happened there, we had there's it's huge. It's quite a big place. You know, if you've been daytime, but we did stick to the hot spots, and the generator room or the engine room that seemed to be quite an active room.
Yeah.
We had I was there for my first vigil, and we were conducting an EVP session, and we had a PIR motion sensor at each entrance. So there's one entrance with a single door and one entrance with a double door, and we were in the middle of the room. For some reason, everyone kept looking over to the entrance with the single door. They were being drawn over to that area, and people said that they felt like they were being watched. And as we were going around the group and asking questions, all of a sudden the light sensor went off in that area where everybody thought that somebody was over there, or spirit was over there. And at the same time, we had a real drop in temperature. So the average temperature was around 18-19 degrees in there.
Yeah. And
it went right down to below 10 degrees.
Really? That's a big drop.
Yeah.
That is a big drop.
Yeah. In seconds, so it all happened at the same time. That was quite exciting. And we had hits on the K2 meter in there, and the sick bay, that's another hotspot for activity. And that's on the top floor nearest to the cafeteria and the dormitories. I had actually one of the guests wrote in our book, a lady called Philippa, said that in the sick bay she saw a man in white scrubs, white face mask and white hat in the sick bay corner by the door to the room. Yes. And while I was in there for my second vigil group, and actually didn't really get anything in there, but we were all being drawn to the adjoining dormitory. So we went into the dormitory and sort of congregated on the beds furthest away to the entrance to the sick bay, and put one of our motion sensors on the bed near to the entrance, and it kept going off all the time. It kept going off. So that was interesting as well.
Did you use anything like spirit boxes or anything like that?
Yes. I had a really, really interesting spirit box session, and I didn't get any voices coming through, but it sounded like the whole time it was on, it sounded like an air raid siren going off. It was really, really strange. I've heard that before.
Have you? Have they still got that? Because I know in the canteen they used to have one of the nuclear sirens, didn't they? They had the nuclear air raid siren that you could actually get it to go off, and the sound is very distinctive.
It is.
So you had that basically going off down the spirit box.
Down the spirit box, yes. So that was really. And the other area that's known for activity is the long tunnel. We did some glass
tunnel. Is that you mean the entrance tunnel, the bit that leads from the doors from the little house to the blast doors? That bit.
That bit. Yeah. So that's where you come and you're basically walking into the hill. So when you reach the end of the tunnel, you're 125 metres down, and you don't really realise it because you're just walking in a straight line. But that's quite a creepy tunnel. It's
I don't like it. I didn't like it when I walked in there in daytime.
No, it's not nice in the daytime either.
No.
So we had a glass divination experiment in there, and we had some movement. It felt like something was building, and everyone in the group was being drawn to the entrance where you come in. And at the end of the night, this was really probably the most fantastic thing that happened. We were all in the long tunnel. I think there were about 20 of us that night. So we were all stood along one side of the tunnel and taking it in turns to ask a question out to spirit to see if we got any response. While this was going on, all of a sudden there was a scream, and one of the female guests who was standing nearest to the entrance came charging up the tunnel, and this actually caused a bit of mass hysteria, and other people were screaming and running. Anyway, when it all calmed down, I spoke to this lady who actually is one of our regular customers, guests, and she doesn't scare easily, and she's never behaved like this before. She said that she was standing furthest, nearest to the entrance, and there is some light that comes from there. So you're in a really dark tunnel, but you can just see a little bit of light. Anyway, she said she was looking over towards the entrance, and she said she saw the shadow of, she said it looked like a man, go from right to left, and she was watching this shadow, and she said she could see it coming closer to her, and it looked like a man was walking down the tunnel towards her. And then she said she suddenly felt icy cold and a strong breeze, and she felt like something passed through her body. And the look in her eyes, you could see the fear in her eyes. And whatever happened, I don't know what happened to her, but something definitely happened to her.
And you're locked in when you're down there. There's nobody else can walk in off the street. They can't. I know there's no street, but you know what I mean. There's nobody can come in. You're locked in. The front entrance, the entrance to the cottage is locked.
That's right. Yeah. No,
Wow.
Nobody else can come in. So I think that was why everybody went home, and we were only left with 6 people to stay for the duration of
you're really whetting my appetite for this place now. I mean, I know I visited there as a daytime sort of visit to the museum, and that tunnel, it unnerved me, because it was partly because of when I said to the guy, like, why is it so straight and direct? And he said because if there was a nuclear bomb being dropped, they would have to be able to take out anyone who was trying to barge their way into the shelter, because obviously these shelters are designed to support a certain number of people, and those people are already preordained as to who they're going to be that are going to be allowed into them. So if local villagers and things had tried to push their way in, they've got a shoot to kill policy, and they need it so they can't hide anywhere. And it was like the thought of that, and I must admit, when I've discussed Kelvedon with people, and I don't know if you've thought about this, is why is it's got so much activity? What is it when there's been no catastrophic events? You know, it's not like there has been a nuclear war and people have been locked down there for 3 or 4 months plus or whatever, or people have died down there. I mean, at least with somewhere like Drakelow Tunnel in Kidderminster, which I think it's Kidderminster, people did die when it was being manufactured. It's been proven that there was some kind of pagan site above it and all those kind of things. Kelvedon hasn't got anything like that, Kelvedon Hatch. And I was trying to explain this to a friend of mine who was asking me as well, and I said sometimes you go back to where the most, I suppose, an incident could have happened to you in your life that you're drawn back to. So it could have been, where you got married, for example. It could have been where you went to school. If you loved your school, that's why sometimes spirits don't necessarily go where they've died or where they last were. It's what attracts them. Right. And I think about it with Kelvedon Hatch, before it was decommissioned in, I think it was the 1990s, wasn't it? It was decommissioned. Before it was decommissioned, the stress of being there and being locked in there for 2 weeks at a time, which I from my understanding, they did do when it was operational. You would get locked down there. It wasn't a case of you came and go at the end of your shift. You were down there. You were locked in. And
I think there could have been a bit of madness there.
Well,
and
not knowing if the war had happened, because some of the from the research I've done, sometimes they were made to believe it was true, and that it really had happened. And the thought of being stuck at one of those sentry desks, whether it be where the entrance to the house is, because that was a standard build, and there's quite a few shelters around the UK that have been designed, anything that was to do with the rotor system was designed in this same way. And the thought of being on that desk, being responsible for who comes in and out, or guarding that blast door with a shoot to kill policy, it must have been pretty emotive. It must have, and you would have had it drummed into you: guard this. This is your responsibility. If you let someone through who shouldn't be in here, this is your... And so I wonder if that's why the tunnel is so... That passageway has got so much activity, because of the sheer emotion that must have been for those poor people who were based there.
Yes.
The engine room, I don't understand why it would... Other than the fact that... Isn't that also where the air purification system is? Are we talking about that bit as well? Yeah. So if you were running that, you were responsible for making sure everyone stayed alive. So the responsibility now, it's funny you mentioned that, because I wasn't going to tell you where I thought were the hotspots, but the three places you mentioned are exactly the three places that when I went there during the day on a July day, albeit it was chucking it down with rain outside, but it was a July day. Those are the three places that even my husband, when we were in that engine room, the air purification system room, we both said we could smell a weird burning smell.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I never mentioned it to anyone, but we both said we could smell it. We just thought maybe it was the remnants of the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone I know who's investigated there has said, someone said they could smell this weird burning smell.
Yeah.
And it does seem to be a common thing. So I would love to know whether it was because of the emotion that the event of a nuclear bomb dropping would have caused, is why the place is so active. Because, like I say, there's been no catastrophic events. No. There's just been the potential for a catastrophic event, and it's interesting. It's interesting as to why it is so active.
Yes. Definitely. It's a very, very interesting place, and I'm so looking forward to doing further investigations there.
Yeah, I don't blame you. But talking about further investigations, well, half an hour is nearly up, believe it or not. Time does fly.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. What kind of stuff have you got coming up with Fright-Nights Cambridge?
We actually have some new venues. We are doing more venues around East Anglia now, so not just in Cambridgeshire. And we have Landguard Fort coming up in September. That's the 23rd of September. As Chroma Pier, that's another new one.
Really? You're doing Chroma? Wow.
Chroma Pier, that's our Halloween special. We're doing 2 mini ghost hunts for Halloween on Chroma Pier.
Okay.
And as mentioned before, Hinchinbrook House is a really good location.
Yeah.
And that's the 4th of November. We've got a lot of other events, other regular venues that we visit every year coming up. So
if anyone wants to book on, what do they need to do, Gemma?
If they have a look on our website, www.fright-nights-cambs.co.uk, you can go on to Ghost Hunts and you can book through the website, or we do have a Facebook page as well, Fright Nights Cambridgeshire. You can click on any of the links on there and it will take you straight to our website.
Brilliant.
Or you can book directly through me. You can give me a call. All my details are on the website and on the Facebook page. And I'd be happy to help.
Wonderful. Well, that's
Yeah.
really brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time this evening. I do appreciate it, and it's been lovely talking to you and meeting another paranormal investigator. Anyone who has enjoyed this show and would like to listen to more, please feel free to do so. All our shows are recorded and are on our Parasearch radio webpage, so you're welcome to listen to any of the others. But all that leaves me to say is thank you again, Gemma, for your time. Everyone listening, I hope you have a good evening. Sleep tight, and don't be too worried about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.